Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be taking a deep dive into a study from Jamin Network Open, and this one really digs into this tough reality of pregnancy-associated homicide, and it looks like there's this potential link between state laws and the safety of pregnant women.
Yeah, it's a really important issue, and one that I think deserves a lot more attention than it usually gets. Pregnancy-associated homicide, it basically refers to the death of a woman, during pregnancy or within a year after they give birth. And sadly, it's one of the leading causes of death for pregnant women and new moms, here in the U.S.
Yeah, it is kind of unsettling. We think of pregnancy as, such a happy time. And then this study, that really kind of makes you think about how the laws, where you live, can impact a woman's safety during, such a vulnerable time.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
We're working with a study that was published in Jamin Network Open. And, it's pretty shocking to think about how something like state laws regarding divorce or even access to reproductive health care could have a real impact on the safety of pregnant women.
Right, and I think it's really important to clarify what we mean when we say pregnancy-associated homicide. We're talking about deaths that occur not only during pregnancy, but also up to a year after childbirth.
So it's a much broader issue than you might think at first glance. Now, this study reveals a really startling statistic. Homicide rates during pregnancy can vary wildly across the United States.
Oh, yeah.
Some states have rates that are like 3 times higher than others.
It's a huge difference.
It is. And what's really concerning is that the study found a connection between restrictive state laws and these increased homicide rates.
Yeah, and it really highlights how interconnected all these issues are. For example, the study looked at things like laws that make it harder to get a divorce during pregnancy and laws that restrict access to reproductive health care. Things like abortion or contraception.
Okay, and while there are definitely arguments in favor of those types of laws, like protecting families or, certain beliefs, this study suggests that there might be some really tragic, unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
It's a lot to process, so let's take a closer look at some of these specific issues. First up, let's talk about those laws that restrict divorce during pregnancy. What did the study find in terms of homicide rates in states with those types of restrictions?
Well, the study found that states with these restrictions actually have a 25% higher homicide rate compared to states that don't have those restrictions in place.
That's a pretty substantial difference.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about the real-world impact of these laws.
Yeah.
Imagine being in a relationship that has become abusive and you're pregnant, but you can't even file for divorce until after you give birth because of the law.
Right, and you can see how that scenario could put a woman in a very vulnerable position, potentially even a life or death situation.
Absolutely. It seems like being legally trapped in a dangerous situation could escalate things even further.
It could, and it's important to remember that it's not just about divorce. Limiting access to reproductive health care, including things like abortion and contraception, can also be a factor here. The study found that states with the most restrictive policies in this area actually have 15% higher pregnancy-associated homicide rates compared to states that have greater access to these services.
So what we're seeing is that when women have fewer options, less control over their own bodies and their own lives, their safety is compromised.
Yes, exactly. It seems like having access to those services, having the ability to make choices about your own reproductive health can be a really powerful protective factor.
I see. Now, the study also highlighted a pretty concerning trend in the southern United States. It found disproportionately high homicide rates in those states, particularly for young white and black women.
Yeah, that's right. Young white women saw a 204% increase in risk, and for young black women, it was a 117% increase.
Those numbers are incredibly alarming. It makes you wonder what factors might be contributing to such a stark disparity.
Definitely something to consider. But before we go any further, I think it's really important to remember the leading cause of pregnancy-associated homicide across all states: intimate partner violence. Over 60% of these cases are related to intimate partner violence.
It really underscores how critical it is to address domestic violence as a serious public health issue.
Absolutely. Now, to understand this study's findings a bit better, let's talk a little bit about how they conducted their research. They used data from the National Violent Death Reporting System, or NVDRS, which tracks violent deaths across the country.
And they looked at data from 2018 to 2021.
That's right. And this data allowed them to look at real-world cases and really analyze this connection between state laws and homicide rates.
So I'm guessing they zeroed in on specific states where it's actually illegal to finalize a divorce while a woman is pregnant.
Exactly. They focused on Arkansas, Missouri, and Texas. And they also took into account a range of restrictive reproductive health policies.
So things like limits on access to contraception, family planning services, abortion, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's important to note that this wasn't just some speculative analysis. They actually followed the Strobe reporting guideline, which means they were very careful in their research process to ensure their findings were accurate and reliable.
So we can be confident that this was a thorough and well-designed study, which makes the results even more impactful.
Right.
This is already incredibly insightful, and it makes you think about the bigger picture. What does all of this mean for women's safety during pregnancy? But before we get into that, let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsors.
It's pretty unsettling, to see how laws that might have been intended to do good could actually end up putting women at risk. But the study goes even further than that. It also looks at some specific risk trends that are tied to these laws.
Oh, wow. So what did they find? What are some of the connections they made?
Well, one of the most striking things they found is that in those states that prohibit women from finalizing a divorce while pregnant, the risk of intimate partner homicide increases by a massive 111%.
So more than double. That's a huge increase.
It is. So when divorce is legally blocked during pregnancy, that homicide rate more than doubles. And what's even more concerning is that it's not just a general increase across the board. It seems like some groups are even more vulnerable.
Right. You mentioned that before. It seems like those legal restrictions hit certain groups of women even harder.
Sadly, that's true. For young white women in those states, the risk of homicide jumps by 139%, and for young black women, it's a 100% increase. It's a pretty stark reminder that the impact of these laws is definitely not evenly distributed.
It really highlights the disparities, doesn't it? It's like these groups are facing a double burden, The dangers of pregnancy-associated violence are made even worse by these legal restrictions.
Absolutely. And it's also important to remember that this isn't just something we see everywhere. The study really highlighted the southern states as a particularly concerning area.
Right. We touched on that earlier. What makes the South different in this context? What did the study say?
Well, the data shows a much higher risk of homicide in those states, and it's particularly high for young white and black women. For young white women, we're talking about a 204% increase, and for young black women, a 117% increase. It's hard to say for sure, but it's likely a combination of things, Things like socioeconomic conditions, access to healthcare, even cultural attitudes towards gender roles and domestic disputes could be playing a role. And we can't forget about gun ownership rates, which tend to be higher in the South.
It's a lot to unpack, isn't it? A lot of interconnected issues. It does seem clear, though, that something needs to change to address this crisis, especially in those southern states. But amidst all of this, there was one finding that stood out to me as a glimmer of hope. You mentioned earlier that access to reproductive health care actually seemed to have a protective effect. Can you expand on that a little?
Oh, absolutely. That was actually one of the more encouraging things that came out of the study. They found that across all categories of pregnancy-associated homicide, better access to reproductive health care was linked to lower risks.
So it's more than just, preventing unwanted pregnancies. It sounds like having that control over your own reproductive choices, your own body, is a huge part of it.
You're absolutely right. When women have that access, when they can get the full range of reproductive health care services, it lets them make informed choices about their bodies and their lives. And it seems like that has this ripple effect, impacting their overall safety and well-being.
It makes sense, but I'm curious about how that actually plays out in real life. How does access to reproductive health care actually lead to lower homicide risks? What's the connection there?
Well, one thing is that if a woman is going to the doctor regularly, if she has regular contact with healthcare providers, it creates more opportunities for her to get screened for abuse and connected to resources that she might not even know about. Doctors and nurses are often on the front lines, so they're in a really good position to pick up on those signs of abuse and step in to offer help.
It's like having an extra layer of protection almost.
It is. And beyond that, if a woman has more autonomy in her reproductive decisions, it can potentially reduce tensions in relationships. I mean, think about it. If a woman feels trapped or forced into a situation, things can easily escalate. But if she has the freedom to choose, that can give her back a sense of control and help de-escalate things.
I see what you mean. It's not just about healthcare. It's about empowering women and giving them the agency to make decisions that are best for them.
Exactly. And it's worth noting, too, that healthcare settings themselves can provide a safe space. A woman might not feel comfortable talking to her family or friends about what she's going through, but a doctor's office or a clinic can offer a confidential and supportive environment where she can get help and advice without judgment.
It's like a haven, a place where she can access resources and support without feeling ashamed or scared.
Absolutely. It reminds us that access to quality healthcare isn't just about treating illnesses. It's about promoting overall well-being and ensuring a woman's safety.
This is all so insightful. It really gets you thinking about the bigger picture here. What does all of this mean in the grand scheme of things? What are the real-world implications of this study? Where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? This study isn't just about numbers and statistics. It's about real people, real lives that are at stake. It's a wake-up call for all of us. Lawmakers, healthcare providers, you and me, everyone. We need to recognize the huge impact our policies and actions have on women's safety, especially during pregnancy.
It feels like we're at a crossroads, like we have a choice to make, Do we continue down this path, or do we make some serious changes to protect the women in our communities?
I think you're right. And the study offers some concrete solutions, some real steps we can take. For starters, we need to address those legal barriers that can trap women in dangerous situations.
So those laws that restrict divorce during pregnancy, we need to reevaluate those.
Absolutely. And it's bigger than that. We need to make sure women have access to comprehensive reproductive health care, no matter where they live or how much money they make. Every woman deserves to have the resources and support she needs to make informed choices about her reproductive health.
It sounds like creating a system that puts women first, a system that prioritizes their well-being, is essential.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that reproductive rights are human rights, and that a woman's autonomy and well-being are directly tied to the health and safety of our communities as a whole.
That's a really powerful message. But this goes deeper than laws and policies, doesn't it? Don't we need to tackle the underlying cultural attitudes that lead to violence against women in the first place?
You're absolutely right. This isn't a simple problem, and there's no simple solution. We need to challenge those harmful gender stereotypes, promote healthy relationships, and work towards a culture of respect and equality.
It's a big task, but it feels important.
It is. And it starts with awareness, with having these conversations, with getting people thinking and talking about these issues openly and honestly. That's how we start to dismantle the systems that perpetuate violence against women and create a world where pregnancy is a truly joyous and safe experience for everyone.
That's a beautiful thought. This conversation has been incredibly eye-opening. I feel like we've covered so much ground today. Before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners? What do you want them to take away from this deep dive?
It is a lot to take in. It can feel overwhelming, but I think it's important to remember that knowledge is power. This deep dive has given us so much to think about, so many different pieces to consider. It's like we've been given this roadmap to help us navigate these really complex issues surrounding state laws, reproductive rights, and women's safety during pregnancy.
And it sounds like this roadmap has some pretty clear directions, too. I mean, the study seems to be telling us that we need to advocate for policies that truly put women's well-being and autonomy front and center.
You've hit the nail on the head. The study isn't just about pointing fingers or dwelling on problems. It's about inspiring action, about prompting us to look at our own communities and see how the laws and policies in place affect pregnant women, and then push for changes that will create a safer and more just world for them.
It makes you wonder, though, what can we actually do with all this information? It's easy to feel powerless when you're faced with such a huge, complicated issue. But I really believe that each and every one of us has the power to make a difference, even in small ways.
I absolutely agree. Real change often starts at the grassroots level. We can support organizations that are out there fighting against domestic violence and advocating for reproductive rights. We can educate ourselves and the people around us about the real-world impact of these restrictive laws. And most importantly, we can use our voices to demand better from our elected officials.
So it's about education, it's about advocacy, And it's about raising awareness.
Exactly. It's about amplifying the voices of the women who are most affected by these issues, making sure they're heard, and building a powerful wave of support for meaningful change. It's about changing the way we talk about these things, shifting the narrative away from blame and judgment, and instead fostering empathy and understanding. And ultimately, it's about recognizing that women's rights are human rights, and that we all have a responsibility to ensure their safety and well-being.
That's such an important message. As we wrap up this deep dive, I keep thinking back to something you said earlier, that this study is a wake-up call. It's a stark reminder that pregnancy, while often seen as a time of joy and anticipation, can also be a time when women are incredibly vulnerable.
And that vulnerability is only magnified when you have laws and policies in place that restrict women's choices and limit their access to those vital healthcare services. We can do better. We have to do better.
You're so right. We need to work together to create a world where every woman feels safe and supported throughout her pregnancy, a world where she has the resources and the autonomy to make the choices that are right for her life, for her family.
I couldn't agree more. So to all our listeners out there, I want to leave you with this. Think about what we've discussed today. Let this information spark something in you, a desire to learn more, to do more, to be a part of creating that better world. Even the smallest actions have a ripple effect, setting off waves of change that can truly transform our world for the better.
What a powerful message to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been an honor to have you here. Until next time, keep those minds open, keep asking those tough questions, and keep fighting for a better future.
Until next time.